And a very good afternoon, possibly good morning to some of you. I don't think we would have good evenings at this point in time, but to all our participants that are joining us, thank you for staying on, because I see some familiar names that have been with us since the first session this morning. We are at session 4. It's been an exciting day. We've had very good discussions, thought-provoking. And it's good to see that even amongst our participants, we are having a good representation of the public and the private sectors. In this session, we are going to look at money in some form, green financing, ESG investments. Yeah. And to kick us off, I just want to introduce Ms. Gaya Herrington, who will be giving opening remarks. She is the Vice President of ESG Research in Schneider Electric. But beyond that, she is also a Dutch econometrician, a sustainability researcher, and a women's rights activist. She's unfortunately not able to join us live this evening, but she has kindly taken time to record a message for us. So, if you just glue your ears to the screen and listen to what she has to share.
Good day, everyone. My name is Gaya Herrington, and it is my pleasure to be able to address you on this important conference. I want to thank the Asian Network and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia for this opportunity to share my thoughts about a green future in Asia. It is a very important topic because only a green future is a thriving future. Society has woken up to the idea that there is no trade-off between human well-being and ecological well-being. Indeed, future human well-being crucially depends on society's ability to learn to meet human needs within the limits of our planet. This prime challenge of our time is what I have written about extensively over the years. All the details of my research you can find in my book, 5 Insights for Avoiding Global Collapse by Gaya Herrington, which can be easily found online and is free to download. But in general, what I found is that if business as usual were to continue, specifically our pursuit of economic growth at all costs, the world will experience a collapse within our lifetimes. A collapse does not mean that humanity will cease to exist, just that we would experience a steep decline in our welfare levels. But this is not a prediction of doom. It is a warning that we should change our ways. Even though we are currently on a trajectory of ecological breakdown, we are not destined for it. Collapse can be avoided if we shift societal priorities from material output growth towards meeting human needs while protecting and, when possible, regenerating the environment. This finding, of course, resonates with a wealth of other research already, from the impending irreversibility of climate change and mass wildlife extinction to growing social unrest, conflicts, and pandemics. My research indicates that there is a root cause of these persistent problems. Chasing growth as the ultimate goal, not growth in and of itself, but our relentless pursuit of it at the expense of all else. There is also more promising work being done in the fields of well-being or post-growth economics, amongst other things. New frameworks and policy and business solutions that put human and ecological well-being not at the periphery, but at the heart of the economy. Asia will have a uniquely interesting journey in applying and tailoring these frameworks, policies, and tools to local circumstances. There are parts in Asia where growth in material and industrial output will contribute to human well-being. This should happen in radically environmentally friendly ways, including by using so-called green growth policies and innovations, but of course then growth there would not be a bad thing. At the same time, the number of people that has reached income and material wealth levels to the point where more of it will not make them much happier will also keep rising. For this group, more growth in business as usual mode most likely will reduce their well-being through things like, for example, health damage caused by environmental degradation. For these parts of Asia, the new challenge will be to understand that a further increase in progress and prosperity will not come anymore from the mindset of never enough, but rather from the mindset of enough for each. And so it is my hope that my words will stay with you today while you're having your discussions about the newest technologies and other innovations, so that you may remember that real green innovation is not about just reducing negative impacts, but about enabling nature to positively thrive, and that real progress, developments that truly contribute to a strong future for Asia, is about having people been able to release the goal of ever more, and instead strive for better.
Thank you, Gaya, for sharing those thoughts with us as an opening. Really, I like what she said. A greener future is a thriving future, and really looking at human well-being being at the heart of the economy. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that in a while, but I want to go straight into really introducing our speakers to you this afternoon. First off, we have Mr. Syed Mubarak. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer, EVVO Labs, as well as the head of the ESG subcommittee of the Smart Cities Network. A sustainability veteran with over 30 years of experience, he is currently also sitting, as a member of the Carbon Working Group of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, having delivered more than 300 sustainability projects across Asia to realize carbon reduction, waste management, community engagement. Syed is a man passionate about embracing technology, really in the areas of ESG, green financing, and carbon management. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Syed. Next, we have Mr. Anouj Mehta. He's the Country Director for Thailand, as well as the Unit Head Green Innovative Finance for the Asian Development Bank. With almost 30 years of working experience across Europe, Southeast Asia, India, China, and he has been based out of different cities around the world. Anouj has also been advisor to governments, including the India's Ministry of Finance on public-private partnerships, which is a very important thing that we've been hearing echoed throughout today's sessions, the whole stakeholder collaboration. And he has also been leading ADB's finance approach in Southeast Asia. His expertise has included infrastructure finance, climate finance, strategy and innovation, public-private partnerships, amongst others. Thank you so much for joining us, Anouj. And last but not least, we have Ms. Nirnita Talukdar, Regional Coordinator for Asia Pacific, United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative, or the UNEP FI. In this role, she is leading the work on implementing the unit's strategy to mobilize sustainable finance in the Asia Pacific, providing support to financial institutions in their journeys towards achieving the Paris Agreement goals as well as the SDG. Bringing more than a decade of experience working in the developmental sector, she brings to us different perspectives in terms of in sustainable finance and the interface between business and human behavior, and as well as has done a lot of research on financial sector accountability. Thank you too for joining us, Nirnita. Now that I've introduced our speakers, I'm going to jump straight in to having the conversation with them. Let me start with Syed first. How in this whole session when we're talking about green financing and ESG investments, how have you seen these areas evolve in your business sector? Perhaps you could share a little bit more with us.
Hi, thank you, TJ. And it's my honor to be here to join the distinguished panel with Anouj and Nirnita. And of course, since morning, there's a lot of talk related to climate change and mitigation, risk and a resilience aspect of it. And this topic is really, really important because we are talking about money. Because nothing can be done without enhancing or enabling money to achieve the goal, right? So and thank you for the very interesting question you put forward, TJ. And I look at from a little bit bigger perspective then before jump into the very specific or a couple of market segments. If you look at it globally, right, today almost $40 trillion assets are pledged under the ESG. And by end of the decade, it could jump into $50 to $60 trillion out of $120 trillion assets globally. And on the contrary, from ESG financing or green financing, or you call green bond, it's actually from a decade ago, that is about 2012, where it's literally started. It's about $5 billion. Today we are talking about more than $500 billion investment get into the green financing. Having said that, there is also a result or a lot of reports from ADB and also from World Bank illustrates that globally, in order to combat climate change, we might need about $30 trillion investment by end of the decade, to achieve Paris Agreement, to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius pre-industrial era. Having said that, in the ASEAN itself probably need $3 trillion to $4 trillion investment in that context, because ASEAN, going through a lot of changes, and also is an emerging and developing economy, and of course also aligned with rapid urbanization, right? So in all, right, we look at it, financing, to the projects related to energy, water, waste, supply chain, name it, and including social inclusivity context. That's, we call social bond. While green bond talks about environmental aspect of it, social bond talks about social inclusivity, improving quality of life for the people. So, but green financing also tie into the ESG investment commitment from the investor point of view. Because how does it happen? Because the companies need to be committed. If the companies doesn't commit, then the ESG investment doesn't happen. At the same time, green financing for the banks or other associations to support the green financing element becoming a very challenging. Okay, so then I zoom into from a global level to if you look at the ASEAN or Southeast Asia level, I can say that Singapore and Hong Kong kind of are leading the hub in terms of sustainable finance, green bond, sustainable linked loan. So in a different aspect, Singapore, aiming to be the green hub for the ASEAN level, with the government committing a significant amount of funding. If you look at it, the latest report from MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, committed almost $30 billion investment into the green bond by public sector by end of this decade. And equally, Hong Kong is driving more from a government sector and the private sector context. And there is a lot of impacts are happening. But what I see that most of the investment goes to the green energy transition aspect of it. In my point of view, there should be a lot of investment should go to the energy efficiency point of view. If you look at IPCC report or IEA report and UN report, even yesterday the report launched by IPCC, giving a signal of a loss warning, in order to control the 1.5 degree pre-industrial era temperature, that we have to reduce our emission significantly. The one way to reduce emission is actually enabling energy efficiency. Whether it is a built environment, that is the real estate sector, which consumes 40% of energy use globally, and which is significant contributed for the carbon emission, both from a embodied carbon and operational carbon. And the second aspect will be on the transportation sector, which requires almost, any country you take it, ranging from 20 to 30% of carbon emission from transportation sector, right? And last but not least, energy sector, agri sector. So I think the investment has to go equally in all these sectors towards the net zero planning or decarbonization, you can call it. But having said that, we really need to change our behavior and improve efficiency, so that investment has to go to the energy efficiency, which I see that still lacking a lot across the region, whether it is America, Europe, or even ASEAN.
Okay.
I stop at this point in time. I will let probably Anouj and Nirnita to add some points to that.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Syed. Interesting thoughts you shared, and I just want to bring this up then to actually a slightly higher level, and the same question I think I would like to pose, perhaps first to Anouj. Really, how have you seen then this whole green financing, ESG investments evolve in the region, especially within the work and the scope that you are doing within the ADB?
Hey, thanks very much. Appreciate that. And yeah, I'll echo some of the same points as just laid out. From a very macro perspective, 2022 saw a slight dip in the raising of green finance from the markets. So if you look at 2021, I think we had almost $1 trillion globally in funds that were raised from green, social, sustainable bonds all over the place, which fell to something like $860 billion in 2022. So there was a slight dip in the amount of money raised. So that's one part of it. The second is the application of those. So in terms of investments, certainly, what we've been seeing as a trend over a few years has been the amount of funds which have been going into energy. So, certainly into renewable energy is probably sort of, where the greatest amount of focus on. But also, which is very heartening, is apart from energy, you start seeing a few pockets of investment going into non-energy related areas, which are important for net zero. And that's, for example, sustainable transport. So we've started seeing investments going in, for example, railways, or into surface transport like mass transit systems. So, I think again about the bond issuance that we helped Thailand do about 1.5 years ago, which was one of the first sustainability bonds in Southeast Asia, in Thailand. And most of that fund has been used for their metro line over here, what they call the BTS train. And so a lot of it is going into that. So a green infrastructure investment, which is not energy, which is nice to see, because traditionally a lot of the money has been going into renewable energy. What's also interesting to see is that there is a greater, let me not say a flow of money, but a greater rising awareness of other sectors where energy efficiency is important. And that, for example, includes green buildings. So, sitting in Singapore, you would know that, that's one of the biggest markets or the greatest examples of good things happening in buildings. It's a fairly low hanging fruit. So where you're not building a whole railway line or a mass transit system, and it's quite an easy low hanging fruit to focus on green buildings. And that we've started seeing happening in a few places, including, I would, sort of say even energy efficiency on street lighting for green buildings. And you start seeing pockets of that happening in Malaysia, certainly Singapore, a little bit in Indonesia. So we started seeing that happening, and India. But of course, this needs to go a long way further, which is, I think perhaps, where I probably leave my intervention, that though you're seeing investments in things like renewable energy, a lot more needs to be done on energy efficiency, on other sectors such as urban transport, green buildings, etc., if you really have to achieve the target that has been committed to. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Anouj. Nirnita, what about you? Your observations. I'm sure you would echo similarities, but I would like to hear, what other things have you observed?
Firstly, thank you so much, Syed, and very nice to meet and actually hear from you, Mr. Anouj and Syed. Also, a really thank you to the Asian Network and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN for inviting me to be a part of this session. It's really an honor to be here. So coming to your question, I mean, as I think a lot of it has already been spoken by Mr. Anouj and Mr. Syed, but in my work also what I'm really seeing is that there has been a significant momentum and also an increase in awareness across Asia-Pacific region. This is obviously being driven by concerns about climate change. There are a lot more regulations that are coming up, a lot more corporate sustainability initiatives, and obviously there is the investor demand. We've already spoken about green bonds and social bonds. So obviously there is quite a huge rise in sustainability-linked instruments. But what we are also seeing that there has been a surge in green capital allocation across Asia Pacific. What I also feel that with the number of upcoming taxonomies and sustainable finance roadmaps that are being developed by central banks and policymakers across Asia, green finance in the region is actually poised to grow even more. So obviously, I mean, as we've kind of spoken about some of the financial hubs already, and there is a heterogeneous nature of different markets in Asia, because of which that it implies that adoption of ESG has been quite diverse. But overall, what we are seeing is a growth of green finance and sustainable banking in the region. And actually, today we have more than 95 Asian financial institutions that are signatories to the UNEP FI frameworks, be it the principles for sustainable insurance and the principles for responsible banking, with 7 of the top 10 APAC banks being a signatory to the PRBs. We're also seeing a lot of APAC financial institutions that are joining the UNEP FI convened net zero alliances. So, I mean, obviously, as mentioned, that I do think that there has been a significant momentum. And this is great. We must be ambitious and urgent in our climate action to ensure that we are able to move towards climate goals and SDGs. This also then obviously follows that there is a major need for increase in knowledge and capacities on climate and sustainability, and to ensure that the knowledge is deployed in all activities being done by the financial institutions. So be it from assessment of risk and considering lending and investment proposition in how you engage with the client. So these are steps that are being now taken by financial institutions across Asia, but obviously this is also growing as we also understand and learn much more about what sustainable finance is in the region. So yeah, I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Nirnita. I'm hearing that regulatory environment is getting more robust, right? Because of the sheer amounts of money that we are talking about that goes into such financing and investments. And it's interesting to note that for both Syed and even Anouj, that you alluded to the need for more work to be done on energy efficiency, as opposed to your conventional, traditional renewable energy. So I guess looking at this, where you have more stakeholders coming on board, but more work needs to be done, more money is coming in as well. I'd like to first throw this question to perhaps Nirnita, and then to Anouj, because your work involves a lot of this working with the fund managers, so to speak. What more can be done to really ensure, that these vast amounts, because Syed alluded to almost $3 trillion of investments that are coming into ASEAN. What more can be done to ensure that these funds are effectively channeled to the right projects so that we get the greatest impact on the ground? So Nirnita, if you could share your thoughts on that first, please.
Thanks, yeah. So my work obviously consists of working with a lot of financial institutions, especially banks and insurance companies. And I think the first thing is internally, banks need to internalize risks early to avoid its impact on balance sheet. I think that's a very important point, is to look at climate risk and physical risk. And banks should not be missing out on opportunities brought up by the transition and new sustainability businesses. Effective impact management is required so that financial institutions can deliver positive impact, thus enabling it to align with policy objectives, meet stakeholder expectations, and manage the risks and opportunities. Importantly, to ensure that finances are mobilized towards climate action, I mean, I've already talked about there is a major need for developing the capacities of financial, and be it not just the sustainability departments, but also among all the financial professionals, there is a major need to increase their knowledge and capacity on sustainability issues. More data is needed, better management. And lastly, I mean, what we've already spoken about, that regulations are coming up, regulatory frameworks are coming up, and it is important that as taxonomies are being developed, it's important that we keep up to date and ensure compliance with all these regulations. At UNEP FI, just very quickly in terms of at UNEP FI, how we are looking at risk is also in terms of impact, and how banks can ensure impact. So this focuses on reducing unfavorable financial losses, but this is what also PRB banks are then setting apart in their sustainability journey. To use an example, a traditional risk management would consider simple divestment, but in PRB, we are more advocating towards changing the business and greening the economy. So obviously this is very important towards ensuring a better planet. And just very quickly, also on the capacity building, I just wanted to highlight that with UNEP, we provide a lot of capacity building to financial institutions to ensure that they are then able to work in a way so that they're able to effectively channel their money towards the right projects. So yeah, thanks also.
Thanks, Nirnita. Anouj, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, so many good points already raised, and Nirnita. Maybe I'll take, sort of a slightly different spin on it. So, certainly if you look at, the question of what more can we do to accelerate, put it in context as a starter. Southeast Asia alone needs $211 billion a year. That's an old estimate. The numbers have changed already for green investment or climate investment. We probably get something like around 50% or so from the public sector, depending on country. And so the rest has to come from the private sector. So if you bear that in mind, and you come down to what can we do to make this funding happen, sure, one side is what Nirnita has already raised, which is the regulatory side, right? So good taxonomy, good policies. Secondly, sort of ensure that the financial systems, the banks, sort of internalize the policies for ensuring that they're only doing green lending, for example. So that's one side, right? What I'd call regulatory policy taxonomy. The other side is what I would call the project side, where the demand has to be created and has to be immeasurably scaled up. And that's probably the one of the biggest issues, that the pipeline is simply not there to attract this volume of capital needed. Even if you created the bond instruments, even if you green the banking system, the underlying projects don't exist to the scale required. So, when we come to that, I think then what needs to be done is probably two things, especially when you go down to hard infrastructure, going back again to your public transit system, your wastewater, energy efficiency, going down to, for example, your local SMEs and how we green them. At that local level, a lot more needs to be done in terms of capacity and awareness and project development support, explicit project preparation support, which says this is what greening or climate mitigation and adaptation means, so that projects are not just given a taxonomy, but they actually help to understand what is their climate impact. So one is a lot more explicit grant-based project preparation support, especially to local governments in many of these sectors. The second is what I call de-risking. So, even if there's a lot of money available from, let's say, global, your pension funds who want to come into ASEAN, given that many of these sectors or projects are for the first time accessing commercial money, there's still a high perception of risk. So what's needed is almost every country needs to have a transition vehicle or a de-risking fund, which can essentially take some of the risk out from some of these projects. So it could be an exit guarantee, it could be an upfront VGF, viability gap funding structure like instrument, etc. But that's basically where the public sector financing role can be stronger in saying that, if you're going to push on green buildings or on public transport or on water supply or on SME treatment plants, we, the government, basically put so much money, to try and ensure that a project is bankable, de-risked, as long as that project ticks all the green taxonomy criteria, has a climate impact indicator, we will support the government, and therefore we insist that there is a multiple of private capital coming in from some source. That will scale it up. And there are examples which have which have been done in China. We ourselves have created in Indonesia something called the SDG Indonesia Green Finance Facility that is supported by ADB and led by the government of Indonesia. And that's simple role is de-risking, create the projects and scale up capital into these from different areas. Maybe the last point is, the development of more instruments. So your green social sustainability bond, instruments where governments, SOEs, and city governments can do a lot more raising of money is also a very powerful tool. So again, 2 years ago, we launched, last year we launched an initiative focusing on GSS bonds. And it's surprising that, across all of ASEAN, there is such a lot of demand for, this initiative to support them in structuring, issuing such bonds, which can raise money. So, these are the different tools, I think, which can help. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Anouj and Nirnita. A lot of food for thought, a lot of broad macro level, but also bringing it down to, I think, what was shared in terms of the need for, at local level, I think on the ground, what I hear is, I think more education is needed, more awareness and more support so that we do the risking. In an earlier session, one of the speakers was talking about this death valley. Yeah, and I think that's where I think government support can come in. I want to bring a slight shift then, when I ask Syed, because I want to bring in then the perspective from the private sector, because with all these that are taking place, the business leaders, the private sector enterprises, the business owners, they also need some form of paradigm shift, because traditionally, going to business means I got to make money. If I cannot make money, I either go bust or I have to find some other means. Yeah, and greener future, while it's a attractive, terminology, buzzword, to many of them, I think it is still something that is new. Yeah, especially the more conventional, traditional, smaller businesses. So, in your view, Syed, what must business leaders do to adapt, so that they still make money, but ensure a greener future?
Thank you, TJ, for a very interesting question. And of course, definitely, business is all meant for making profit, right? I think from post World War II, all the 7 decades, we worked on a linear economy, so and consumer-based economy where maximizing profit, right? It's all about profit, right? But how we can exactly created a impact that what we are talking today about climate change, mitigation of climate change, risk alleviation, and resilience building, so that today and tomorrow can be better for us and future generations. So in that context, exactly that, solving climate change, one hand can't make noise, right? 2 hands to make noise. So that means private sector and public sector has to come together, because both has a vested interest in making sure that the global population and it can be sustained for the better tomorrow. So in that context, right, while that's where the triple bottom line came into the picture some times ago, right? People, planet, and profit. And there is one more P added that is actually a purpose. So purpose-driven entities, right? Whether it's a listed company or conglomerate or an SME, or it doesn't really matter that if the company is built, the funds are purpose-driven, meaning that it takes care of the 3 sustainability here: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social inclusivity, right? If the fundamentals are built on that and being there for a long term and willing to be in the market for a long term, then definitely the ethical principles are well set. Then the whole process driven on whether it's a manufacturing or a service oriented or a supply chain related or a real estate developer, then the whole fundamentals of taking care of the environmental and social will be fundamental of the business. Then we no need to see that we don't need to see this kind of problem today. But what is the reality is that's not really happening in many part of the businesses. So if you look at it, as we talk COP15 and now COP27 and 2030 goals, 2040 goals, and 2050 goals, one of the fundamental the companies need to follow science-based target, SBTI. And globally today, only about 4,000 plus companies are taken part in the SBTI goals. In that, almost 1,000 over companies in ASEAN or Asia, right? If you look at listed companies in Asia, right, almost 22,000 companies. So it's only a fraction of companies are, adapting to the science-based target in mitigating climate change, whether it is net zero ambition or reducing carbon footprint on scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So I think that kind of attitude and commitment need to be enabled, and of course awareness. So I think there are a lot of educations already available. I think the awareness has to come from a real project execution in order to mitigate risk. I know Nirnita talk about risk compliance, and of course Anouj talk about project demand creation. And if we talk about in a corporate world 2-3 decades ago, we talk about risk management, then become a risk mitigation. I think today is no longer risk management, risk mitigation. It's actually a risk adoption. How we can adapt the risk, because risk is already there, right? If we don't adapt and then don't put in a right action in place, and a proper materiality assessment in terms of business fundamental, to sustain the business for a long time, so that can be economically sound, so that they can create a good environmental and social benefit for the people around wherever the business operates. I think that's what I believe that. But the ecosystems already exist. The technologies are there. If I take a look at the built environment sector, that is building green buildings, right? And buildings already built in the world, right, which will be last for another 40-50 years. So every building has at least 20 to 40% energy efficiency opportunity, right? So the investment has to go in that context. I started energy conservation back in 1999, right? So we can see that there is a huge potential, but still, slow in action. So on the contrary, all the new buildings going to be built, to cater for the 2.1 billion people going to be added into the urbanization agenda over next 1 to 2 decades, meaning that you need a lot of home building or offices, manufacturing facility, and we should not be following the cookie cutter formula, but has to be on a sustainable development criteria based. Then in that context, we build the right from the onset, and we make sure that existing facilities are, improvised through efficiency measures, whether energy, water, and waste, and supply chain aspect. Then I'm sure we can see a better world tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for all the insightful sharing. We've got one question that has come from Rafael. Basically, he is saying that many big companies will only change at the speed of regulation. Meanwhile, early growth stage, purpose-driven tech founders have very limited options in Southeast Asia with regards to grants, angels, VCs, etc. And he sees that there's a need to bridge the gap between development banks, for example, to capital allocators who are driving progress, as there will not be enough large projects at time scale. So essentially, I think he's asking grassroots innovators, those on the ground, where it may not be big scale. How, in your view, can we get capital to these innovators? Yeah, would anyone like to share?
Maybe I'll start.
Sure.
I think I can start from a Singapore context, right? I mean, if you see from the last 2 decades, there's a lot of transformation taken place from a strategic roadmap building for Singapore, and enabling innovation and enabling startup to get into the ecosystem and providing grants, support, and VCs, and of course seed capital. And because I do mentor a few startups, those are on a very early stage or mid stage, like a Series A, Series B kind of stuff. There is already an ecosystem exist, in Singapore context. Then I can talk a little bit about Indonesia, which is a growing ecosystem in the context of startup, which I'm very much associated with the Jakarta and Bandung Institute of Technology, on a different context. But having said that, I totally agree that there is still a lot of work need to be done on the grassroots level for the new startup to be scale up the business. At the same time, it really need to create an impact. I think that's one of the whether it's a big startup or a big company, my point here is about, providing a financing. And there is a lot of money, but money is not getting the right firm. The reason because that, banks are concerned about how the proceeds are really used. Right? There need to be a proper track and trace mechanism so that the projects funded, whether it's energy efficiency or green building or green manufacturing or a startup enabling sustainable development, that need to be properly tracked and traced, and the impact generation to be available for public, so that there is a transparency in place. And for that, there are technologies like a blockchains are available, although it is in a nascent stage, not on the crypto side, which is already in a very advanced stage, but on the blockchain is a technology to use solving the fundamental problem. And probably that is something, we need to really work on in the in the years and decades to come.
Thanks, Syed. Nirnita, Anouj, any thoughts that you want to share on this?
Yeah,
How
maybe.
Can you bring? Yeah.
Maybe just very quickly, it's such an important question, because if you look at the small and medium enterprises, I'm not even going micro. In many of our countries, like I'm sort of sitting in Thailand, 90% plus of the businesses is SMEs. So this is actually a super important question. And for me, I think we see two ways of doing that, of supporting them. One is direct access to finance. So there's can we and the question is right. Large-scale providers of capital like your banks or like us, the development banks, tend to look at large-scale ticket sizes, right? And that tends to be large pockets, large projects. So when you're going here, you need a very different vehicle. So ADB, for example, has something they call the Ventures Fund. So we've got an initiative which is specifically focused on small, medium enterprises, where where a team goes, tries to help them evaluate the projects, bring in some expertise, but also essentially try to provide direct lending to those projects using the venture capital, private equity mode. So ventures is a super important initiative at ADB, and you see a lot of interest from small enterprises in seeking funding. But the second is enabling national banks to create their own approaches, because on a project basis, to come to an ADB or a World Bank or JICA, it has its own time span. So the other aspect is supporting the development of SME financing facilities in local banks. So we did this, for example, many years ago with India, creating an SME finance facility. ADB did that, and you'll find other examples of this across the board in both from sort of commercial banks as well as development banks. Creation of national SME focused finance facilities, which say for certain SMEs which are green or tech or some other specific one, we can provide some sources. The third part of it is capacity building, and so this is something where you're seeing growing interest. For example, right now we are focusing on water and EVs, right? Small companies who want to scale up, and we're saying, can we help you develop your business plans and do knowledge sharing? So an incubator has been set up in our Jakarta office of ADB, which is working with the United Nations in Indonesia, the UNDP in this case. And we are saying together with that, we want to help develop business plans, shadow credit ratings, access to finance models. But this is capacity building for a number of small, medium enterprises, initially in Indonesia, and then it will be all over ASEAN. This is called the Blue Finance Incubator, which was set up about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So those are the three different ways of maybe trying to help. I'll stop.
Just also very quickly to add, so one of the points that Mr. Syed also mentioned, that banks they are looking for projects and they are looking for MSMEs whom they can fund. So in fact, I was having a conversation last week with two of the banks in Asia, and they were like, can you help us find small, medium enterprises to whom we can actually provide funding to, because we do want to go and expand on our green growth, but we're not really finding the right projects. So I think so as a part of when a bank signs on to the PRB, India, what we are seeing is that when we ask them to focus on two impact areas, the first one is obviously not obviously, but a lot of them are looking at climate mitigation or adaptation. But the second impact area that most banks in Asia specifically are looking at are financial health and inclusion. So the idea on the financial inclusion and health is that UNEP then supports banks in understanding and in providing guidance on how they can look at and provide necessary funding, the kind of funding that is required by MSMEs. So it's not just going beyond just inclusion, but ensuring that MSMEs and SMEs are able to receive the kind of funding that they would want as per the banks by themselves. So this is what we are providing support to all our banks. The third thing is also because Anouj also mentioned Indonesia. One of the interesting projects that we are recently starting now is we are working with a partner bank to provide funding to provide financing to shrimp farmers in Indonesia. Again, this is a market which is banks have for a long time not been wanting to touch this part, but this is what we are trying to see how we can get a partner bank to ensure that we're able to reach out to women-led small-scale shrimp farmers in Indonesia. So that's the difference that we're doing right now. Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you all for the sharing. For our participants, if you heard what has been shared, there is supply of funds. It's just a case of you may need to do a little bit of homework to find those. Yeah. So Huni, I believe your question has been answered. In fact, by both Anouj and Nirnita. And from the demand point, I think there is hope for grassroots innovators, for the small businesses. It's really a case of find the right platform. Our speakers here today, they are all on LinkedIn. You can try to connect with them. If anything, you can go to Asian Development Bank, you can go to UNDP FI to find out more information. Yeah, I think that's part and parcel of also such a session like this, where as the speakers are sharing, the platforms, the avenues get presented to you, the audience, the participants. And with that, I want to bring a close to really this session. We really appreciate the invaluable insights that you've given to us. Nirnita, Anouj, and Syed, we really appreciate it. And for the participants who have been with us for the whole day, thank you. Because this conference has been organized by the Asian Network in partnership with ERIA, as well as being supported by Australian Aid. And at the end of the day, it is really about wanting to bring that information to you as the participant, even as we share, because as the speaker said this morning, and that has been alluded to by our speakers here today, this afternoon as well, the only way we can continue to grow towards a greener future is really to ensure that continued stakeholder engagement and stakeholder collaboration across all levels. Yeah. And for that to happen, really, being an entrepreneur myself, we cannot just sit back and wait. We have to take a proactive step. We have to actively reach out to engage, to find the right audience, to find the right open door, so that through that, then we can find the right partnerships that will then propel our ideas forward and really help all of us to move towards a greener future in Asia. So with that, I will wrap up this session and also this conference. Thank you so much for your time. My name is TJ, on behalf of the Asian Network and ERIA, and also all the speakers that have taken their time to grace this event. Thank you. We wish you a good evening and a good weekend ahead. Take care. See you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.